So when we got ready to plant New City Church, there's a lot of things that looking back on it, I would have done differently. So today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to be talking about 4 specific things that I would have done differently if I were to be planting New City Church all over again.
Well, welcome everybody to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brian Drosian. His name is Dylan Dotson. And today we're talking about 4 things that we would have done differently when planting New City Church.
Yeah, so I'll share a little bit of our story, pre-launch story, and things that looking back, I'm like, man, I if I could have done it again, which I'm not doing it again, we're here now. With hindsight, things I would have done a little bit differently that I think would have done better for New City Church, just for maybe for you to think through things if you're planting a church or you have guys that you're going to plant. So things I would have done differently based on my experience.
Yeah, common things to watch out for.
Here's number 1. Probably even before, this might have been the biggest one, but it's having a clear launch date from the beginning. So I did a church planting residency, which we'll talk about too, and all that sort of thing. And it kind of had like, we'll probably launch at this time, which was, I think at the time was like fall 2017, and things got pushed back, whatever. Yeah. But I think one of the hindrances of getting people on board before we launched was we weren't clear about this is the launch date and here's what we're going to do. And some people said, don't set a launch date, because if you have to push it back, then that could be killed momentum, and that looks bad. What I would say to that is, yes, there is a little bit of a risk of pushing it back, but however, when you get closer to your launch date, if you push it back a few weeks or a month, nobody really cares. And in my opinion, as long as you know you're going to plant this church, like you're not doing this by yourself, maybe you've gone through assessment, you have a network, a denomination, like you have people say, yes, this is a good idea, that the benefits of saying, here's what we're doing when we're doing it, far outweigh the potential downfalls of pushing it back. Because plus, if you're going to have to delay it months and months and months anyway, it's probably not, your problem is not that you had the wrong launch date. You probably got bigger issues that you might not be able to overcome. So I would say from the beginning, this is our launch date. Here's what we're going to do, because that allows people to get on board. Because for us, until we actually said, which we ended up launching in April of 2017 for a bunch of different reasons, which was in January 2017, we said, here's when we're launching. It was at that time that we actually started to get momentum, and people got excited because they actually knew we were going somewhere. We had a clear direction.
Yeah. In my experience, it's very difficult to tell people or to get people excited about it, or to kind of recruit people to join on your team and things, if you have no specific date in mind. If it's just kind of this ambiguous, it's coming kind of thing, that might be okay for a little bit, but after a while, I feel like everyone kind of starts seeing through that.
Right.
And the other thing is, if you have to move the date back, just a little bit about that. Generally, if you have to move the date back, things are progressing at least somewhat. Mm-hmm. So I feel like if you're moving things along and this data is coming up and you have to push it back, as long as people can see that things are happening, that's far less of a big deal than just always saying it's coming in the future.
Right. Especially your team, if you're being clear about what's going on, their expectations are adjusted and they get it, and they might even be excited about it. Like you're saying, the ambiguity of it. Planting a church is already ambiguous for a lot of people. Especially because a lot of people that join church plants maybe be non-believers, or maybe believers who've never really taken ownership at a local church. So they have no expectations of what's supposed to happen. They don't really understand what's going on. And so for you to also say, we also don't know when this thing is starting, it makes it really hard for them to say, yes, I'm in. People need to know what they're working towards, not just some general good idea that you're really excited about.
Right.
And so for us, luckily we did launch and all that sort of thing, fortunately. But that was a big thing I would have done different from the beginning. Say, we're launching at this time. Your like pre-launch track of like what you're going to do, that can change. Like people say, we're going to do this for a few months and this for a few months. That can change. That's not a big deal. But having say, regardless, we're launching now would have helped us tremendously. And I would just say to other planters, have a launch date, let people know. It makes it way easier for people to get on board with what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure.
Because they see it in date and all. So that's number 1, clear launch date. Number 2 is something that we did, but I would have done earlier. Again, this goes back to having a clear launch date so that we could have done this. But that is having weekly gatherings with your launch team.
Yes.
Now, when I say weekly gatherings, I'm not talking about a service. Be very clear, it's not a service. And I know it's hard because that's what we're used to doing. Like we're used to being in services and preaching and singing. Like, what else am I supposed to do? It's a great time for just people to build relationships, for people to get to know one another, for people to buy into the vision. I think there's a little bit of a guilt factor. It's like, it's Sunday whenever you gather, we're supposed to preach God's word. And I get that. But for the long-term health of your team and your church, it's okay to step back for a season. Like, God is not going to smite you for not preaching and reading his word and singing a bunch of songs for a short period of time in a more structured environment, because you're getting people on board with what you're doing.
Yeah.
We started weekly gatherings when we started doing that, that is when everything changed for our church. Because I think I've shared a little bit before, like we did these monthly launch team gatherings, which were not good at all, whatever. But one of the biggest changes, other than saying, here's our launch date, is starting weekly gatherings in our home where people were saying, oh, this is my church now. Because even if they're part of your team, they still, especially if they're not thinking about ministry 24/7, which they're not.
Yeah.
It helps people see, no, this is actually my church home. This is my church family, and it gets them excited about what's going on. So I would have started weekly gatherings much sooner. I see some guys like have a launch plan going back to like a launch date. I wouldn't say I'm launching in a year. Or I wouldn't even say, because that's too long.
Yeah.
But people, like, if you're going to launch in 9 months, don't start having weekly gatherings right away, because that's a long time of gathering, but not starting, and if that makes sense. So maybe 3 months, 4 months, 5, 6 months out. Be very clear that it's not a service. It's okay if it starts to transform more into a service as you get close.
Right.
But just having a weekly rhythm of getting together helps people see that this is real and this is happening.
Yeah. I shared kind of my story of how I got connected with New City multiple times, but long story short, we were looking for a church plant that hadn't planted yet, found New City on Facebook a few months before planting. And that was one of the big things that drew us, not that drew us in, but that kept us there, was there was something for us to plug into immediately. Right. This is before any talks of staff obviously were on the table or anything like that. We were just looking for somewhere we could help out. And there was a lot of churches that we would contact or that we look up that hadn't planted yet, that we couldn't find any information about if they were meeting, when, anything like that. And then we got in touch with New City, and we were able to jump right in. It wasn't, like you said, it wasn't church services. It was just everyone getting together once a week. But we were able to get right in and able to start meeting people right away, because we were new to the area and knew almost nobody. So we were able to immediately start getting in and start forming relationships.
Yeah. So meeting weekly gatherings, not church service type. We'll be very clear. Yeah. Don't even meet, like, I don't know where you're going to launch in, but don't even meet in the same place you're launching.
Yeah.
Like, make it very clear. It's not that you can't preach a little bit or sing a few songs. But just be very clear. It's not a normal service. But starting to get together weekly, I would have done sooner, because it helps build momentum, helps people build relationships with one another on the same team.
Yeah.
That's something I would have done. Here's a third thing, which, looking back on it, I guess I wasn't as clear as I should have been, but I would have been more clear about giving to the church plan. Here's what I mean. A lot of people you're talking to about your church, like, I think you're very clear about joining the launch team or, financially supporting the church, whether or not they're on the launch team or not. But I still remember going back to starting weekly gatherings, which is why I think it's also helpful to do this before you launch, is we had this couple, part of our launch team, that was from the very beginning. Like, we were in our little community group thing we were doing, like, they were in from the beginning. And we were getting dinner with them one night before we started weekly gatherings on Sunday morning in our house. And the husband goes, oh, I guess that means we should start giving to New City now. And I didn't say anything, but I'm like, you've been on this launch team for like 6-7 months. Yeah. And I'm like, what do you mean now? Like, what do you think we've been doing? Right. And what had happened was I'd been very clear with other people, but maybe not always as clear with our team about our needs and what we needed financially.
Yeah.
And so just be clear about it, clear about our giving, clear about our needs, not just with people you're meeting with, but also with your team, even giving them updates, because I think they like the idea of knowing where they are, getting some behind the scenes information about what's going on.
Yeah.
So I would have been a little bit more clear about giving, and not that you need to like publicly tell the world on Facebook or a blog, whatever, like where you are month to month, but just with your team, because as they see the needs, they're might be more likely to give and ask other people, friends or family that they know that might want to support church planting. But just be very clear on what you need, not just like when you're meeting people one-on-one, but just with your team in general.
Yeah, I think it's easy to assume that people know, especially if they've been around for the entire time. Like, they can see all the process, they know roughly what things cost, they know that this all takes money, and so it's easy to forget the people that have been there forever, that they might not know it all.
Right.
And so I think that's something to keep in mind, that even if we assume that they know what the need is, or know what the need is, or know where we financially are, they probably really don't. Right.
Yeah. Again, I think that's one of the things that we can do often in churches that does not help our churches, is to assume people know things that they don't. So it would have been a little bit more clear on our giving for everybody, and give our team updates, because I think that probably would have given them a little bit more buy-in, and maybe even led them to give a little bit more.
Sure.
So be more clear about getting. And then number 4, I did a church planting residency before we launched. I think those are good to get some training. But I personally, one thing I would have done differently is I would have done more research behind it. So what happened for me was I was raising support. I was really excited. I was younger, obviously didn't have a ton of experience. And I was like, well, this church will take me. And I did this residency that wasn't very helpful. Like, it wasn't structured. I didn't get out of it what I should have. And so that was really disappointing and discouraging, especially because I had raised a full-time salary and I felt bad. People were giving, and like, this isn't what it's supposed to be. And so looking back on it now, I think it's good, especially if you're the younger you are, to do a church planting residency for a year, or to be on staff of the church that's going to send you out.
Sure.
But for me, because I was raising my own support, the options of churches probably were much larger than I thought they were because no one was paying me to do it.
Yeah.
And so I should have asked more questions on the front end in terms of what is this going to look like? If you're doing a church that says that they're a church planting church, have they planted churches? Like, what's their track record? If they haven't planted churches in years, that should make some red flags. Now, it's different if you're part of a church that wants to plant a church for the first time or just getting started. But if a church says they're a church planting church, but they don't have a record of planting many churches, or their previous residents hadn't planted many churches, that should be some red flags. So I would have done some more research personally myself. I would have definitely still done a residency, but to make sure it's a church that really aligns with what I want to do, with my vision, my mission and values. And that might be being patient, which is really hard for us in ministry to be patient, but really to find some place that you fit in well, because that'll be better for the long-term health of the church that you want to plant.
Yeah. And this coming from myself, I never did a residency anywhere. I'm just on staff. But I would imagine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine, especially being younger and kind of first getting into the whole church planting world and trying to find a residency, is probably would be kind of hard to turn one down, because it probably seems like, hey, this one's taking a chance on me. I'll take what I can get. But especially, like you said, if you're raising your own support, I think you'll find that more are willing to at least start you in the process than you think.
What you said is very true. What I should have done is just taken more time to research, pray, instead of being like, well, this one will work. I know some people at this church. And so just jumping on the first opportunity. And maybe I wouldn't have found a different one. I don't know.
Sure.
But this is one thing I would look out. I think it's good to get to find training, especially the younger you are, but make sure the residency or the place that you're sending you has experience and is ultimately bought in.
Yeah.
And whoever's running, whether you're residency or whatever, whoever's running it needs to be bought into you, not just the idea of planting churches, but whoever's leading, whether it's the lead pastor, whoever needs to be bought it and excited about you being there, because if they're not excited about you being there, they probably won't spend as much time with you and develop you as much as you should be developed. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great thing for all churches that do residencies. It's a good thing, but that's where you're going to be spending a ton of your time and getting all your training. So I think it's okay to be a little choosy. Make sure you're going to be spending your time at the right place.
That's right. So those 4 things I would have done differently. Again, have a more clear launch date from the beginning. Start weekly gatherings sooner, not a service, but weekly gatherings with your team. Be more clear about giving, especially to the launch team, and more research on a residency or training before launching the church.
Excellent.
So thanks so much for being with us today on Practical Church Planting. As always, you can go to practicalplanting.com/questions if you have questions you want us to cover in a future episode. And thanks for being with us today, and we'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.